You're listening to the Coffee and Technology podcast brought to you by Cropster. I'm your host, Nick Castellano, here with my co-host, Norbert Niederhauser. After an eventful SCA Expo in Boston, we're excited to get back to recording and speak with our friend Darrin Daniel. Darrin is the Executive Director of the Cup of Excellence and the Alliance for Coffee Excellence. Darrin has been at the forefront of coffee auctions around the world in an effort to achieve higher prices for producers and connect various roasters and producers worldwide through the Cup of Excellence. Throughout the episode, Darrin discusses his work at ACE and the COE and the opportunities and challenges that have come with the growth of COE auctions. Enjoy. All right, Norbert, we're finally back from SCA, rested and recovered. How are you feeling after the trade show, man?
Oh yeah, that was a show. I loved it. After literally 3 years, I've been there and seeing all the people, and it's wonderful to be back in the real world. I would say um, I like the virtual world too, but having people face to face, hugging people, it's fantastic. Yeah.
Cool. Sweet. No, it was an exciting show. My first one, a bit overwhelming, but definitely super cool. But speaking of one person that I'm sure we both wish we would have spent more time with at SCA, we finally get him welcome into the podcast. Darrin Daniel of the Cup of Excellence. Welcome to the podcast. We're super excited and fortunate to have you here today.
Oh yeah, it's great to be here. Yeah, thank you for the invitation. Yeah,
absolutely. Sweet. Well, a lot of the coffee world probably does know who you are, or if not, the organization you work with, Alliance for Coffee Excellence and the Cup of Excellence. But if you could tell us in your own words, kind of who you are, what you do in coffee, maybe a little brief story of how you got into coffee. Those are always interesting to listen to. And I think, it'd be really interesting to learn more about that.
Sure. I serve as the executive director for the Cup of Excellence and the Alliance for Coffee Excellence, which formerly were one entity and still really at the heart of it, one entity. Based in Portland, Oregon. We're in our 22nd, 23rd year. I've been with ACE and COE for a little over 5.5 years. And prior to that, I worked with Allegro Coffee and Whole Foods Market, basically. They being the owners of Allegro for many, many years as a green coffee buyer for Allegro and quality control person for tea and coffee, and buyer for coffee and tea for Allegro over the years, probably a little over 20 years working for them. Started as really in the very beginning, I started as a barista working in Eugene, Oregon, and for a coffee company called Coffee Corner Limited. And they were one of the first specialty coffee companies on the West Coast. I think they began around 1977. I started working with them in the mid 80s as a barista and then a roaster trainer and a roast support person. And over the years, I've worked for a couple different coffee companies, worked with Illy Cafe in Seattle as a technician and trainer, all things coffee as a trainer. And then went on to work for Whole Foods briefly before I went back to Allegro. And I took a sabbatical from Allegro, and then during that sabbatical, I was the green coffee buyer for Stumptown Coffee Roasters out of Portland, Oregon, and was their head coffee buyer there for about 2 years. And but most of my career has been with Allegro, and certainly kind of done a range of different jobs. But over the last few years, really green coffee purchasing and quality control have been kind of the core of what my background has been. Of course, with the executive director job, it's been more about, kind of say it's more like high-end cat herding of either members or, the organizations that we work with to try to get everything, really going in the right direction as a director and leader for the organization. So that's a little bit about my background. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, jumping in there. So the green coffee buying aspect is, of course, the one which connects you to farmers. So would you want to talk a little bit about the current activities at ACE and at COE? What's going on? What's happening there?
Yeah. Well, this year we will host 12 different COEs. That's up significantly from the 2020 pandemic, which I think we were at 8 countries. So we're pretty much back to normal. We do have some additions to the program, being Ethiopia now, and will be in its 3rd year, and then we brought on Ecuador as a new country this past year, and then also Indonesia. So a lot of excitement there. We are getting back to some in-person juries. We'll have 3 in-person juries this year, which is Mexico, Guatemala, and El Salvador. And then later in the year, a total of 6, but we will have juries in the last half of the year with Peru and Colombia and Brazil. So,
amazing.
Yeah.
So how was that, Darrin? If I may just go into that direction, so I've been a part of, or have been visiting some of the COE competitions myself. And it's an exciting week. It's a lot of tasting, cupping, a lot of coffee for sure, and very cool people. So I really enjoyed being there. So and then the pandemic hit, and you'd had to pivot into another direction. How was it for you? How did it work out?
Yeah, well, we're still in a somewhat of a pivot in that, we still have countries that are electing not to do in person for either COVID related issues or in some cases budgetary, but also that there was quite a bit of success with what we call the global coffee centers, the GCCs. And so when things first hit in the very first weeks and months of the pandemic, which I'm going to say is March 2020, we had to immediately come up with an entirely new program to actually even do the program. And that led to us doing these global centers. And we really basically went to a lot of our tried and true members that have been on multiple juries that would have been on those juries in person. And then we asked if they could basically employ 2 to 3 cuppers that would be in each lab that would be representative of those particular geographics around the world. So whether it was in Australia or Japan or Taiwan or Korea or Europe, we had a couple different people that stepped up in Dubai, and just a number of different members said we would volunteer to serve as that virtual jury, right, or not in-person jury, and then those copies then had to be sent from the origin countries directly to those labs. And I think in year 1 we were in 8 labs, and now in 2021 we flexed, I think, to 12 labs, and we had to kind of divide it up. So we had some labs that were in the first half of the year and some labs that were in the last half of the year. And we actually, just for fun, in year 1, we decided, since we were going to have 2 different kind of teams that would be on various juries throughout the year, that we would call them like Team Bourbon and Team Typica, and we had a lively WhatsApp thread for each team, and a lot of as close as we could be to almost feeling like we were in person. We did some online training, Zoom training, so that everybody could be together to kind of figure out the calibration, and meeting with the head judge online and all of that. In many cases, the head judges were able to travel, but just not the full juries. For instance, like with Paul Songer in Ethiopia, he was going back there to kind of keep the national jury going and all of that.
Yeah.
So, we had different kind of combinations and different situations, and that really opened up the door to a lot of significant change. The floor price for COE auction lots changed. The volume or the amount of coffee that was allowed to enter was lowered, which actually turned out to be really beneficial for producers, because the prices did go up. When we lowered the 5-bag minimum, exportable 5-bag minimum, and went down to 3 bags, and that was a big game changer. Our national winners auction, which is like a 1-week auction, we expanded to 2 weeks, and we let the countries kind of decide where they thought the floor price would be, which is something that I think was helpful, because not all countries really have the same cost of production, and it allowed the countries to be a little bit more nimble. So really, the end effect was all of this chaos that the pandemic created opened the door for many opportunities for the auction and the competition, that some of which won't change, most of which will change, but some of it won't. And it also kind of opened the door that we didn't necessarily need to have a floor price that was consistent across all countries, or an exportable amount of coffees, and that in a way kind of, I think, distinguished the program, that it was catering to each country in a way that gave it all the opportunity to have a successful auction, really. So we did all of that first year work in about 2 weeks to basically reconstruct the entire organization, with the help of then at that point Aaron Wang was our managing director, and did an amazing job to make it all kind of come together. And the entire team, everybody really flexed and kind of knew that this was the only way that we would really be able to exist if we didn't make this change. So yeah.
It's amazing. Well, I was not aware of half of things, but now I am, and it's just wonderful to hear that there's so much more flexibility, as at the same time also so much more learning and opportunities. So I think that's what ACE and COE always was about: opportunities for farmers, right?
Right, correct.
Like increasing those is fantastic. So yeah, I'd love to hear about that. I also hear there's like some technology, more technology involvement, right, needed for all those virtual interactions.
Yeah, and honestly, I mean, if it wasn't for the work that we, as part of that pivot was going to work with Cropster and being able to socialize the cupping platform, and utilize that, because honestly, imagine that what would have happened is, and did happen for some of our private collection auctions, was we had scans of all of the score sheets from all of the judges from all of those countries, and then an auditor would have had to compile all that information into another spreadsheet, and that would have taken hours of work. All the descriptive analysis, the attribute scores, all could be captured using Cropster technology. So it was a huge sea change for us to be able to kind of upgrade to that. And there are some countries that have not using paper, but in this scenario, it was critical to flex technology to make things happen fast. And that was the thing, was that there's such a rush to get these coffees to the auction platform, and we can't delay even a day once we start the process, and without having to back up the auction. So yeah. Even obviously the auction platform itself is, has technological advancement for us to kind of, leverage what we're doing. But without having things like that happen, it would have made it a lot more cumbersome and difficult. So yeah.
Super cool. And I heard there's also some organizational changes, keyword 501c3, I believe.
Yeah. So, in the very beginning, when ACE started COE started in 1999 in Brazil, but in 2002, we recognized that we took ownership of the Cup of Excellence from Brazil, and we wanted to globalize that, not just have, one country, but we wanted to do many. So we were lucky enough to work with BSCA to basically take the rights of COE. But while we did that, we also created an umbrella organization, which was ACE. And when we filed with the U.S. government for our IRS designation, we were not given a 501c3, which is a charitable organization. We were given a 501c6, which is basically a trade association and a membership trade association, which is what we are still today. ACE is a membership organization. In 2014, we filed and petitioned. And because we have an auction platform, the IRS kind of felt like we were too close to the market. The auction itself, even though we weren't selling or buying, we facilitate buying and selling, but we actually don't buy or sell those lots. And so during 2020, we had already started the process to go through another petition, and we were given that COE Cup of Excellence was given that 501c3 designation as a charitable organization. And so now we are legally two different entities, one mission, but
Mhm.
one set of staff right now, but we are growing. So we're hoping to add staff as we start to kind of escalate some of our work with our private auctions, which fall under the ACE umbrella. And then everything with the competition in education and training is Cup of Excellence. And so it's very exciting for us to open ourselves up to funding opportunities because of having that designation,
Yeah.
and especially for US-based companies that could donate to our program success. And that's more it's more of a benefit for those donors that want to seek a tax credit or a refund based on their give. So
Right.
it's been a lot of a learning curve to kind of restructure what we have two different sets of boards, a lot of overlap there, but it is something that is really a big paradigm shift for us. So yeah, in a good way. So yeah.
So speaking on, I mean, this just sounds like obviously ACE and COE are just growing every year. And going back to a little bit on the origin specifically, I'm really curious because as you grow, you add more origins, and you mentioned that already. But can you speak a little bit on the experience of adding specifically Ethiopia as the origin a few years ago? I know like that region, that part of the world historically, you know, the ways of buying is through the national auction. So I'm curious to know what the experience was of setting up Cup of Excellence in Ethiopia, and what kind of the opportunities and challenges were, and some of the outcomes of the first COE in Ethiopia as well.
Yeah, I mean that has been one of the most amazing parts of my journey with the organization was onboarding Ethiopia, and we worked with Feed the Future Value Chain Activity, which is an organization funded in part by USAID and mostly USAID, and also FinTrack. And so in year one, 2019, we just basically created the infrastructure and started to basically get closer with the Coffee and Tea Authority and develop a steering committee made up of the Exporters Association, the Roasters Association there, obviously the Coffee and Tea Authority, ourselves on that steering committee. And we essentially laid the groundwork for what would be a 2020 auction, and not knowing that the pandemic was going to hit because it was the first country affected. And of course, in our thoughts, we didn't believe that it was going to be a successful year because of what was going on with the pandemic. But despite all of that, it was the most successful. Year two COE Ethiopia was more successful than year one, but basically it broke all of our records. And it
Wow.
what I think, I mean, obviously the opportunity was just to go to the birthplace of coffee and conduct this competition, but to have a 3-year, grant cycle for us to really do it really, really well and learn from what we did there to help other countries that we are already working in. And one of the outcomes, I think, was the fact that the Coffee and Tea Authority had said that in the process of onboarding COE and other things that were going on with the Coffee and Tea Authority and the Ministry of Agriculture in Ethiopia, there was a liberalization of exports, which then made it easier for exporters and co-ops and producers to move their coffee through ECX, but not all through the Ethiopian Commodities Exchange, but more direct sales. And really COE represented that idea that there was really a direct sale. It wasn't going through the ECX, it was going through a separate auction. And what we were told, and if you've seen even recent reports just a couple of days ago, that I think Ethiopian exports are up 113% over last year. So, and last year they were, up, I think in the 90s. But what Dr. Adunya, who's the executive director of the Coffee and Tea Authority, is said is that not only are we seeing an increase of exports, but we're seeing an increase of grade 1 and grade 2, a significant increase somewhere in the 20-23% range of higher graded coffees going out of the country. And they believe that Cup of Excellence was a contributing factor, that we had washing stations and exporters that were creating higher quality lots to submit to COE, but also to export. And that ripple effect created a lot of financial, windfall for producers in Ethiopia. At the same time in 2020, cherry prices were at a record high. So that's probably also why that contributed to the higher dollar value of exports out of Ethiopia. So there is a ripple effect that is much larger than what COE can do in an auction. And because we only sell 25 to 30 lots for COE and up to 10 lots in a national winners auction, but it did create an industry effect. And that is something that we would hope for in every country that we work in, but they could have been able to really quantify that that's actually true. So to have that kind of effect in a country that has so much quality coffee already, and to further distinguish itself is pretty unique. And so I think the challenges were namely the pandemic, and some of the infrastructure issues that we had with warehouses and getting coffees to Addis Ababa. But I mean, the team just did so well. And Kiddist, who's our in-country coordinator and who continues to serve as our in-country coordinator, really has, along with Ian Chesterman, who was the chief of party for Feed the Future, just did an extraordinary job. They really elevated everything. And I think the rest really is kind of history in terms of what we were able to do. Because in 2021, I think auction proceeds were over $1.8 million for both the COE auction and the National Winners auction. And typically we see a $600,000, $700,000 auction per country. So this was just off the charts crazy. So yeah.
Wow, congratulations. And it's so good to hear that the mission of ACE and Cup of Excellence comes to fruition and can be measured. It's so hard sometimes to get those measurements, and I know that it's part of it, right? It's not only about that auction. It's not about those few lots going through the ACE auction. It's about much more, and seeing that is fantastic.
So I'm really curious. You mentioned you've obviously COE has added a lot of value to Origin and producers, and that's a part of the mission, which is amazing. Obviously, I'm also really curious though. What is for roasters and buyers who are not necessarily have the capacity to buy auction lots yet, but who are thinking about it? What kind of value do these auctions add to buyers as well, not just producers on one end?
Yeah. Well, I think buyers have an opportunity to convey to consumers that this program is highly unique, highly vetted coffees, that there is a stronger connection to those producers because that information is so accessible. So if we kind of play off the idea of being, an early architect, if not the architect of direct trade, because that model was already in place. COE's model was already in place before some of the, kind of pioneering companies really started DT. If you think about some of those direct trade programs now and where they're at, like namely, I think to Stumptown and Intelligentsia and Counterculture being the early adopters, they all were heavy participants. All those buyers have either been on our board, like Dwayne and Jeff Watts and other people, and Peter's involvement with purchasing COE. All of that kind of came out of that experience. So, I think that model is still available to any buyer that wants to come in and either they already have a program set up and then COE would, kind of fall underneath that idea of transparency. The fact that I think consumers are asking more about, what are you paying for coffee and can you prove it? And it's pretty easy to say, go check out the COE website to see what was paid and our name and, yes, we bought that coffee. And so I think those are benefits. Obviously quality is the, kind of the, the gold seal here in terms of what we are trying to advance. Without quality, the program wouldn't really be able to have evolved. And also buyers, I think buyers have an opportunity to follow trends, because if you think about the early days in Guatemala, originally natural processed coffees were not allowed into the competition, but other countries were, and honey processed, things like that in Costa Rica. So other countries started to look at it and say, wait a minute, we might be missing an opportunity here, and so if you look at the trends in in our current time, we see a proliferation of anaerobic and carbonic maceration, and it's not going away, and it's there, and it's now throughout the whole, coffee value chain. You see it pretty much everywhere, not everywhere, but in most places. And so I think if I was a buyer and I wanted to kind of see what was going on, I might want to buy a sample set, or I might want to go on a jury and kind of experience what's going on in Honduras, whether it's varietals or fermentation processes or post-harvest, fermentation processes that might be unique or new. We always have felt like we're kind of a petri dish, or kind of an incubator for what might happen later, industry-wide. So I think that's a great value and insight to roasters, or buyers in our program. So yeah.
And I mean, I know as a consumer, it's fascinating, like just being at the event that you did in LA a few weeks ago and learning more about the COE coffees and the stories and the background and the processes behind getting to where those coffees were purchased. I mean, it's obviously fascinating. You get to taste it, and it's a really unique experience, I think, as for a consumer. And I think it's also interesting because I feel like the COE kind of sets the bar for the what wine has. Is they have like the point scale. I always forget the name of the
Robert Parker's wine scale. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And for me, it's always like kind of like the similarity in coffee is the COE, because it kind of sets the bar of what is high quality coffee, what is highly valuable coffee, if anything. So I've always appreciated what the COE does and how all these coffees are presented. So
it's very insightful to kind of see, to get opinions from the outside about what the perception is really helpful for us as an organization too, always. So yeah.
Enjoying this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast? This podcast would not be possible without the support of Cropster. Whether it's tracking harvest yields, roastery and inventory management, or simply tracking brew recipes, Cropster Origin, Cropster Roast, and Cropster Cafe can help you streamline your workflows and help you operate more efficiently.
So speaking of those points, what's the COE range, and is there changes? Do you think those evaluations of coffees have changed over time? What an 86 means, what an 88 means, and how those evaluations come together. Also with the background of not having everybody in the room anymore. So I'm kind of circling back a little bit on that virtual topic and how that might impact scoring. And
no,
that's
great.
It's a very complex thing. So I appreciate that, and
I
understand there might not be one answer.
No, it's so there's a historical answer, which is, I think in the very beginning we started at 80. I'm pretty sure that in 1999 with Brazil, I think it was 80, and then we quickly moved to 84. I'm not sure when that happened, but I do know that since I've been here, we moved it from 86 to 87, and that was a concerted effort because we just felt that that quality has improved across the board around the world, and as that's happened, we've had to kind of evolve with that in the scoring structure. So during the National Jury Week, which is the week before the International Week, when people come from all over the world, or if the coffees go out to the GCCs, the National Jury qualifies anything 86 and above, and then it goes up to 87. Now, has there been a conversation about moving to 88? I think in the short term, probably not. In the long term, I think it probably will happen where we will end up going up. And I think that's a reflection of what's kind of going on out there. And it's also just kind of upping the game. Like, if you have let's say you have 16 judges and your aggregate score, your median score is 87. That means there are people that scored at 90 and there are people that scored at 85. Some people didn't want it to pass. Some people thought it was incredibly valuable and high quality. And that's why we always throw out the outliers, so that we really do get a true median. So when you see an 87.88 score from COE and you taste it, my branded as an 87 from maybe an outside party or an internal quality control lab or a buying unit of buyers that say, well, this is our 87. I would say that it would be pretty easy to prove that the coffee that that we say is 87.88 is probably going to be a much higher quality coffee, not too far away from let's say an industry score versus a COE score. I feel like those coffees always are popping and seemingly probably a little bit of a higher score than what the ACE jury or the COE jury has deemed it, which to me is an insurance policy for buyers. Like if you know that it's a COE 87.88, you probably know it's easily going to be your 87 plus, or higher coffee, or if not 88 plus. So I think that's something we should be really proud of in what we've created. And I think the pivot during the GCC process, we really did see coffees that we would taste in our lab and say, this is an 88, but the jury globally is given it an 87. And this has been very challenging for us. So I think the stated scores have been generally lower, less presidential scoring coffees, which are coffees that score 90 and above. And that's been a little bit disappointing for us. But when we get the sample sets and we cup them in our lab and other people buy those sample sets, they're like, wow, this is great. I'm not necessarily going to reference the jury score. I'm going to reference my team's scoring of this coffee, and therefore I'm going to bid on X, Y, or Z. So I think ultimately the buyers have the final say, jury or not. And that, it's saving grace in a way for us, in that let the buyers decide exactly what they want to pay for and what value they want to associate that lot with. So I think, probably going back to in person, we'll probably see a slight increase in scores is my guess or my estimate. So yeah.
When I started my coffee journey almost 20 years ago, I did research, and part of that was understanding the coffee supply chain, understanding value along the supply chain. And one concept I'm still almost obsessed with, or really coming back to it all the time, is the perfect matchmaking. So it's when you come with a certain score, which is already like an average from an international journey, that is already, as you say, it's a super solid, I would say, baseline. However, the real value for some coffees can be substantially higher if appreciated by the buyers. So some buyers gave it a 90, as you say, or they pushed it over 90 because it's so desirable. And I think that concept of that perfect match, where the appreciation is higher and the price will be higher, to me is fascinating. I guess the auction gives it that opportunity for some people to go after certain lots.
Yeah, and there's so many elements to that too, because we've seen coffees that get ranked at 16, and they're not in the top 10, and yet the price will be higher than the coffees above it. Maybe not number one, but a lot of the other coffees above it. And then we want to drill down on that and figure out, like, well, why did that happen? And it could be the producer has recognition for what they do. That could be the buyer has already developed a relationship with that farmer and therefore wants to support them and highlight that coffee along with their other coffees that they buy from that producer. It could be, and we see this in the last couple of years, it could be a process that particular buyer was just crazy over and was willing to get it at whatever cost. They just needed to have that. And or even a variety, probably more so processing, at least in the last couple of years that I've looked at. So that's part of that unique matchmaking. And we would see it with in-person juries. I remember first year Peru, 2017, I think 18. And we had a geisha coffee that half the jury just thought, it's not that great, like not even passing. And then we had other people on the saying, this is the best coffee we're going to taste all week. And I remember buyers saying, well, I don't care. I'm going to buy that coffee no matter what, whether you gave it an 87 and I gave it a 92, in fact, thank God you don't like it, because now I want it. And that's another aspect of that is that just people fall in love with that coffee and they don't even know who the producer is at that point. It's all blind cup. They just know that they don't know what region, they don't even know how much of it there is, but they're already making steps to buy that coffee and taking notes to make sure that they get all the codes to say, okay, at the end. And even some coffees that didn't pass. That happened in Bolivia, where the number one coffee in Bolivia from Takezi won the first year, and the next year it got knocked out, and buyers were scrambling to like get the lot, even though it wasn't going to be auctioned. And so, there's a numerous ways at which buyers, kind of engage in that matchmaking process. So I always find that interesting, and it's good. It's nice to take the focus off number one, and look at all of the coffees and see what what's there's always a coffee for somebody in that kind of kind of structure. So yeah.
So I have quite a few questions on, like, when you say Bolivia and like competing auctions and whatnot. But before we get there, I am curious to know, like, what is, speaking on the jury, what usually is the background of someone on the jury? I mean, does it range from producers to roasters to cafe owners? I mean, what's the array of jury members? And then also, how are there any steps that the COE takes to ensure that the juries are objective in scoring these coffees? It's just fascinating because COE being such a global auction platform and people having different palates from different parts of the world, and it's really fascinating that you could have essentially a global jury and still reach an objective, what I hope is an objective score and an objective cupping.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll start with the national jury because I think that's the most critical part of the whole overall structure. And so typically we would have a head judge that's assigned to that country, and they would go down, or another staff person would go down and test the jury. And so people sign up. Generally, those jurists are predominantly made up of exporters who have a quality control person that they want to hire to, obviously run their lab and buy their coffees, but then they'll have them sign up to be on the national jury. Sometimes it's not just exporters, but we've had other coffee professionals, people that are barista competitors and cup tasters from various countries that may be independent and not associated with an actual exporter or importer. We've had importers that have people on the ground that would enter to be on the auction, and then the head judge would go down, and we would give them a whole week or really solid 3 days of cupping various qualities and levels, and then we go back and basically analyze how calibrated each individual cupper was, and then we basically grade them, and they're either highly proficient or needs improvement, or is just not really able to be calibrated and enough with the rest of those 12 to 16 people that would be considered to be the finalists that would then go and serve on that national jury. And that we probably have estimated over 4,000 people, or 4,000 cuppers have been part of the program since the beginning, and they kind of act as volunteers for us. So, and they also have professional development that they're going through by actually serving on that, and not just COE, but other countries that have their own competitions as well. And so that's that part. And then with the international jury, we really want to get a nice kind of an array of different markets and different countries, because different countries have different interests in their buying and what they look for. Some countries and some buyers are looking for more natural processed coffees, or coffees that maybe other markets are more interested in fully washed coffees. And so that kind of crossover is like one of the most important parts. And then also level of experience and background. We ask how many times per week or per month do you cup? Is it part of your daily activity? We don't really ask if people are Q graders or anything like that. We really just want to see the amount of time that they've had as an experienced cupper. If they are new to the program, then they're automatically put on as an observer for their first year, which means they can participate in everything during that week, but they just are not, their scores aren't submitted for the final aggregate score. But they get to enjoy the entire experience, just like any international judge. And so we put the years of experience, the market that you represent, how many times you've been on a COE jury, kind of comes into play, and all those kind of factor in as to how we, do jury composition. And, I think it's always been, as Norbert kind of said, it's been great to have that cross-pollination of different cultures and people and backgrounds to enjoy that week together and cup together. And it creates, camaraderie. And, people love to know that, you like that one too, and you thought it had, apricot and, golden raisin and all these flavors. Like, I got the exact same flavors. That really, it for me personally, that's the experience I had when I first went in 2003. I think El Salvador was my first, and it was just such a, an amazing experience. And I evolved as a cupper and taster, and it led to many different friendships and relationships. So it's more than just the serving for the country, but it's also serving the needs of companies and their teams. And so, yeah, does that answer your question about juries?
No, and it's actually interesting because going back on the technology points that Norbert brought up earlier and you brought up, was one thing that makes me think about is, like, with all this kind of information, essentially cupping information being collected by the juries, and essentially, I feel like all this data collection technology then really helps with feedback to producers, feedback to, I don't know, COE, buyer feedback, and I find that really fascinating because I feel like feedback could be one of the most crucial points to a lot of these processes as well. So yeah, I know it's very fascinating for sure.
And the jury, the last day, or let's say the second to last day, the head judge would usually show all of the, even the judge's information is blind. So you just get a number. You don't know the other person's number. And then you can see your correlation. You can see your pass rate. You can see how many coffees you passed to not pass. And then you can look at the rest of the jury and say, oh, I was pretty consistent. And I had more 86, plus than maybe other jurists, or it shows your highest score you gave, your lowest score you gave. And it just gives you a lot of data to digest and look at. And that's part of that development too, that development process, that you're better understanding how you fit in a global, buying structure, I guess, in a way. So, yeah.
Cool. No, that's amazing. So, switching topics a little bit, the last time we spoke off record, you had mentioned that there were some other programs that COE and ACE are doing outside of auctions that kind of supplement the auctions, such as virtual class trainings and whatnot. And I was wondering if you can kind of speak on those programs a little bit, what you all have done so far, what's kind of in the pipeline, what's coming. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, we for many years we've done what would have been called Cuppers Camp in the beginning, and now it's SET, which is Sensory Educational Training, and those would all be in-person classes where we almost mimic what we do with the National Jury Test Week. So we're giving that same range of scores. But what's more unique about the SET courses is we will go to a country and teach it, both consuming and producing countries, but we'll bring different countries and different qualities, different processes to that country. So it's very rare to be able to taste, from 7-8 different countries, and from an 82 to a 93, and different processes and varieties. So anyone that takes those courses is getting, a really wide array of coffees, not just the coffees from Nicaragua or just from Costa Rica or El Salvador, but all of the different, and in some cases, even from non-COE countries. Well, we'll bring in some Yemen or other origins, just to really round out the whole experience for that student. And that's been a really it's been a growing part of the Cup of Excellence Education and Training Program. And what we're hoping to do is more in the consuming countries, and to provide that more. And then even well, before I finish that, the other part of the set courses, again, during the pandemic, is we had to go to doing a virtual course, and that we've been partnering with Novo Seminelli and their Knowledge Hub series, and our classes are on that platform for and a number of other organizations and companies have classes they're offering as well, and that has been really successful and well. Well received. We I think the first one that we did, we had over 14 countries with 74 cuppers around the world, and we would send all the roasted samples or green samples, I think mainly roasted, out to all of the students, and then they would have one-on-one sessions with the instructor. They would have a virtual Zoom with everybody. And then the instructor would taste through these coffees with them virtually. And that has, I think when people just couldn't get to cupping labs and couldn't even go out, they could at least literally be in their home doing these courses. And we found some people assembling in small numbers, and we'll continue to do these set courses online, virtual. We have a number of courses all the way through the end of the year that are happening all over the world, from Thailand to Saudi Arabia to Mexico, and it just kind of keeps growing, and the demand is there. But the other aspect of that education is farmer outreach, and we're developing some programs. And we've done this in the past in Rwanda and Burundi, where we go out and help educate either a country that doesn't really maybe have a lot of Q graders or cuppers, and we could go out and develop outreach and do training, cupping training, and not just cupping training, but also giving farmers outreach in terms of, why does COE matter? Why should we enter? What's the impact for me if I do enter? And so that's another part of our educational track that we're expanding into Peru this year coming up. And we've done many of these campaigns in Ethiopia, and like 35 different workshops around the country to kind of just educate people about what we do and why farmers should consider entering. And we'll continue to develop that and grow that. There's some ideas of partnering with other organizations to do like women-only courses in various countries to really focus on women, and working with IWCA and other organizations to kind of refine that. So we're in the process of kind of shaping that as we speak. So we feel like that these are probably courses that are awareness building, but also best practices, whether it's understanding nursery development or soil management, things like that, where we'll partner with other people or other Cup of Excellence winners that have won. We'll go out and train other farmers and tell them how they succeeded. So it's almost like letting farmers train each other instead of NGOs, right? I mean, I think it's much more impactful if a farmer's training a farmer, and maybe farmers from other countries are traveling to other countries to kind of create that educational moments. So that's more down
almost
the road.
like a mentorship.
Yeah. And
cool.
And yeah, we have done that. We've seen producers in Brazil that have created coffee schools in Brazil and would actually have other producers come. And this individual actually was an organic certified farmer, and other farmers in Brazil were like, no way, nobody's doing organics in Brazil. And this producer was adamant that you could produce not only high quality, but quality that would be, commercially available, and volumes that wouldn't be, low per hectare. And he built a school on his fazenda, and I was like, oh, that's the model. That's the model. This was years ago, but that's something we want to continue to drive. So
yeah.
So there's only one question left. When are you educating the consumer?
Where and when? I think.
Yeah. Or what's the opportunities? Because that's still, I mean, there's a lot has been done, of course, right? The specialty market has grown substantially to really double digits in the US and anywhere else and somewhere else. But there's
a lot to do. And I think that's the weakest link in our value chain right now, is that consumers either don't know what COE is, or if they do know, they can't find it. And that's specific to the North American market. I can say that a lot of people ask us, where can I find COE? And we're doing our best to say, well, these roasters are selling, currently selling these lots, but that's a very hard thing. Someone might buy a lot and not put it out for 2 or 3 or 4 months, or they wait for a holiday to do it. So we're trying to coordinate with roasters better so that when your coffees are online and available, we will directly connect them to consumers as best we can. And whether it's social media or on our website, or many of our members are based in the North American market, but aren't necessarily coffee buyers. They're just people that are supportive. But they're also, everyone's a consumer at that point. If you want to drink a coffee, and then you have access. And we have had some, really exciting, buyers recently who are, pretty high profile, that are really directly marketing to consumer. And obviously with Big Face, that is a new member for us, and that's Jimmy Butler from the Miami Heat, who's a coffee fanatic and has started a coffee company, and based out of the bubble with the NBA Finals during COVID. And he's really helped escalate our identity out there, and many other members have equally done a great job. But to have that kind of public figure reach, where they have specifically said, we want to buy COE coffees, and we really want to get the word out about these great coffees. So those kind of champions out there, I guess, creatives or influences, or however you want to frame it, those are people that really greatly advance that idea to consumers. And then just doing events, we've been trying to do more events where, we have people come and taste coffees, and whether we do it in Portland or do it, at kind of like Fringe Fest when SCA is happening, where we do some other events to get people to taste coffee. And, being at the Roaster Village, and having people that are in the industry, but also people that, are then going to go out and represent consumers on their behalf. And, the event we did that Nick was mentioning in LA with Good Boy Bob was like, it was really amazing, because I would say probably 90% of the people that were there were just people that love coffee that aren't in the industry. And that's really what we need to see more of, is that kind of, and many of them were asking really, really thoughtful questions. And I thought, wow, that this is where the consumer is moving. Maybe we don't recognize it, but they are moving to ask more important questions, and tough questions, I think, too. And I hope that that continues to happen, because coffee is still fragile as a commodity, and it's still very erratic in terms of where things are going. And so the more consumers know, the more it's going to help producers. So yeah.
And I think that's interesting you say that, because it's one thing I got out of that event, but also speaking to my friends who, they know nothing about coffee whatsoever, but like I can tell and feel like an energy where like there's an itch of like curiosity, like they want to know more, they want to find more, but like the resources are still not as accessible to them to learn more. But you can see it where it's like they really want to know more, but they don't know how to learn more. They don't know what to ask yet. And so I think the curiosity is there within, even beyond specialty consumers, especially coffee consumers. It's a matter of like making those resources and that knowledge more accessible, more available, more digestible, and more just kind of friendly. So I think we're on a good trend, especially with what I saw and what the COE is doing. I think it's exciting. It's fun. Sweet. No, this is all amazing stuff. I really love what COE is doing, what ACE is doing, what you're doing, and very grateful to have you on today. And thank you so much.
No, thank you. It's really been a great conversation, and always a great conversation when we all get together and chat about things like this that matter. So I really thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you, Darrin. I look forward to our next in-person coffee and further the conversation as always.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast. To learn more about Cropster, subscribe to this podcast and follow us on social media. For more educational content, visit cropster.com/learn.